Okay, here we go. All right, so I'm going to use a PowerPoint just to keep me moving in the right direction. It just helps me know that we need to keep moving. So here already, there we go. High school, woohoo! So I don't know if you remember the transition to middle school, but a couple of nights ago, I sat with 70 plus people, parents, really thinking about how do we transition our kiddo to middle school. And now here you are thinking about how do I help transition my child to high school. It's pretty exciting. So some of you might be first time parents to a high schooler. Some of you might be veterans. So likely there are people out there with some expertise in this, and I would invite you to share at any moment. But I really want us to think about this next stage as a really exciting chapter. So in order to really think about that, I want you to consider for a second who you were in high school. So why am I inviting you to think about yourself in high school? I want you to think about what you needed from the adults in your life during that specific time. Who were you during that time? How many mistakes did you make? How many pivots? How many shifts? And my hunch is you were a slim version of yourself, of who you are now. And I don't mean slim like in physically, maybe too, but I don't know. But who you were then, you were still developing. And I think it's very, very important to hold on to this idea that high school is a really exciting time. And it's also a time of learning and growing. Just like any other time in our lives, this particular time has a lot of growing. So if you talk to a high school teacher who teaches freshmen, a freshman is a very, very different person than a senior, right? And continuing on through life. So we need to view this stage through the lens of grace giving. This is a growing time, and some things might really shift and change during these next 4 years, and it might be perplexing, or it might be a bit painful, or it might be exciting. We need to see this as an opportunity to really grow our muscles in order to move us towards that next step, which hopefully will be independence. So any transition is going to be muscle building, and muscle building often requires some struggle. So I want you to keep that in mind. But as we move into this conversation, it's very important for us to understand the developmental stage and what's happening. So for many, many, many years, we blamed the shift on behavior to hormones and the physical changes that happen during adolescence. But what we know now with the invention of PET scanning is there's actually some really cool, incredibly powerful things happening neurologically during adolescence. So adolescence as a developmental stage runs from the age of 12 to 24. So that's a huge amount of time. And I want you to think about all the changes that happen between birth and 3. Like so many things happen. So many things happen between 12 and 24 as well. And that is also why adolescence is the second most critical time of brain development, second to birth to 3. It's a really vulnerable time for your brain because of the changes that are happening. So we know that these changes that are happening, this restructuring that's happening in the brain during adolescence, is really happening in the cortical brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex. And that part of the brain houses things like higher level learning, decision-making, reflection, working memory, cognitive flexibility, personality expression, the ability to pump the brakes, so impulse control, all of those executive functions. That part of the brain is critical. Like all of the things I just rattled off, there's oodles more, right? If you think about that's the part that's restructuring, wow, you can imagine the impact of that, right? So Frances Jensen wrote this book called The Teenage Brain, and she uses this metaphor of the adolescent brain is like a really fast car. So 12 to 14, so that freshman year really is like having a really fast car with really bad brakes. So what that means is that there might be a lack of impulse control. Often in adolescence, we learn through experience. And that's why sometimes you're sitting there scratching your head like, why did you think that was going to be a good idea? Well, often there's not a thinking component. It's just, that's hot. I'm going to touch it, even though you told me that's hot. I got to experience it for myself. So it can be a crazy making time for parents, right? But what we know about this remodeling is that there's these things that happen. One is called pruning. And really what pruning is, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's getting rid of the neural connections that we don't need anymore. It's making your brain more efficient, a faster brain. The other thing that's happening is called myelination. That's the cementing of our neural connections. And what happens during this process is often vulnerabilities will rise to the top. And it makes your brain really vulnerable. During adolescence, your brain is like soft clay. Things make a big imprint. And that's why learning during this time is really important. It's really exciting. But learning isn't always positive. Sometimes we learn negative self-talk or maladaptive coping strategies, right? And that's why addictions sometimes pop up and mental health issues can pop up during this time. So we need to just be cautious. We need to make sure to keep an eye on the fact that stress increases for adolescents, and there tends to be a decreased opportunity for pausing, right? Our kids really tend to hit the ground running during high school. They often are very, very busy. And what that does is it doesn't allow our brain the opportunity to pause and really integrate and take the time necessary for decompressing. So it's important to build that in with your student. The other really cool thing that happens during adolescence is this idea that we're moving from dependence to independence. And your brain is trying to help you out. So it does something that's really helpful, but can also be kind of tricky, right? So it creates more dopamine reward centers. And what that means is your kiddo, when they experience something really exciting, they feel it really big. But that's where the trouble can come in, the tricky part. So think about it this way. Something that actually, like say drinking something, alcohol in some way. We can drink as an adult the same amount, and it's impacted times 3 for a kid during adolescence. The impact is heavier. So we need to just really be aware of all of these implications of the adolescent brain. It's a vulnerable time. The other thing during adolescence is this need for autonomy and independence trumps everything. So this is a picture on the left of my nephew, Gabe, who lives in Chicago, right by Wrigley Field. And this was a picture of first day of school. And his mom, my sister, asked him for that first day of school picture, and this is what he gave her. And I think this is a perfect example of, yeah, no, I'm going to make the rules now, Mom. Like this is me basically telling you, back off me. And on the right-hand side is this text that my son, Eli, who is a 17-year-old, sent to my husband after he left the car lights on in my husband's car. And my husband ended up having to take his car to work. And so the text reads, "Sorry, I left your lights on, ... Hey, can you put gas in my car, please?" And my husband responds, "Wow, that's some text. Don't you have gas money?" And Eli says, "Yeah, but isn't my car almost out of gas? I only have $15. And the reason I really like this is because they yearn for this independence, but they can't see beyond themselves very long, right? And so when you think about this need for autonomy, this is really, really important because the way that we talk to them, the way that we communicate really needs to shift during adolescence. The early part of childhood, we spend a lot of time teaching, and from top down, we teach them things along the way. What happens during adolescence is this need for parallel teaching. And what I mean by that is this need for autonomy is such that if you talk to them like they're a little kid, all bets are off. They're not going to listen to you. Even though they're not an adult, we have to shift the way we communicate with them. So think about it this way. Think about them like a cat. What happens when you run at a cat? The cat takes off, right? We have to be really patient, and we kind of come at the cat very slowly. And if we do it in the right way, the cat might stick around, and we might be able to bestow little nuggets of wisdom on them. But if we come at them full force with, this is what you need to do, they will stop listening during this developmental stage, right? They turn you off, because this need for autonomy and independence drives the bus. Daniel Siegel, who wrote a really fantastic book called Brainstorm, he also wrote a lot of really awesome books. I love him. I love the way that he uses metaphor and the way he talks about the brain. And one of the ways that he stories up adolescence is this idea that it's a stage of vulnerability and opportunity. And I really like that stance, because it really normalizes and gives some grace to some of the behaviors that we often see emerge during adolescence. So one of the things that we see emerge, I'm going to move us over here, is novelty seeking. What is novelty seeking? It's basically risk taking. It's this needing to find out if I can do it on my own, right? And this is the scary part for parents during this developmental stage, because they often do some really ridiculous things that you're like, what the beans were you thinking, right? But this drive for new, this risk taking really is a part of this developmental stage. You know, I not too long ago had the opportunity to talk to someone who actually, I don't know if you know this, but there's an app that you can put on your kid's phone that tells you how they drive. So it really kind of gauges how their driving is when they're away from you. And this kiddo had been caught going 100 miles an hour on this app down Highway 14, right? And I had the chance to chat with him about it, and I'm like, what are you thinking, right? And he's like, I know, but it was so awesome. And he's like, I know, I could have died. I know somebody else could have gotten hurt. Like, they know all this stuff, right? But this need for risk taking is really apparent during this stage, right? So we have to figure out, how do we support this in ways that aren't very risky, right? So I read this book, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago. It's called How to Raise an Adult. Excellent book. I'd strongly encourage you to read it. It's really funny. She gives lots of really good tips. She was an admissions counselor at Stanford, and she talks about how we're prohibiting the muscles needed and that are necessary for independence. And she tells some really funny stories. But after I read that book, I was like, oh man, like I reassessed my own parenting. And I started thinking about, okay, what are ways that I can support this risk taking, this independence journey without me losing my mind, right? Without me being totally overwhelmed with fear. And one of the things I did, now I wouldn't suggest this, but this was my immediate knee-jerk reaction, was I drove my youngest to QFC. I gave her a $20 bill and I said, go in there and get a jug of milk and a core water. And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm not going in there by myself. I'm like, yeah, go in there. You can do it. She's like, well, what if I can't find it? And I'm like, what should you do if you can't find it? She's like, I don't know, look for somebody in a QFC shirt. I'm like, great idea, right? Like, get in there. And she goes in there and I'm thinking, what am I doing? There's 2 exits. She doesn't have a phone. But really, that's what kind of we have to figure out for ourselves. Like, how do we allow them to kind of step out there a little bit in ways that are managing for us? Like, our fear doesn't get too big. The next thing that tends to emerge is emotional intensity. You might be living this right now already, right? This is like, those feelings are enhanced, bolded, highlighted, exclamation mark, right? Like big feelings over things that you're like, why are you getting so worked up about? It is real. It is real to them. This stage is full of emotional intensity. So much so that often it's really crazy making for teens. They think they're like, I don't know what's going on inside of me, right? Like, one second I'm crying, the next second I'm laughing. Like, there's a real journey of emotion during this stage. And if you've ever been somebody who's been on a journey like that, it doesn't feel great. doesn't feel great all the time, right? So we need to have some grace around this, some compassion around the intensity of this time. The other thing is social engagement. They need their peers. They need to be accepted by their peers. This peer approval trumps everything else. Up until this stage, you might have been able to really have a voice in their ear. You might have been guiding the bus, right? If you think about it as in a car, you might have been in the passenger seat helping them drive. Well, during this next high school stage, you're going to get kicked to the back seat. And you might get kicked out. Got to be honest. Like, peers start driving the influence of this developmental stage. And if you think about it from a wide lens, developmentally, in order to leave the nest, it's much easier to leave in a group than to leave alone, right? And some of the tricky, sticky parts of this might be sometimes they might, lose their moral compass a bit to belong. That doesn't mean they lose their moral compass forever, but this strive to socially belong is strong. That's why, sometimes you'll find out something, you'll be like, what were you thinking? That's why we really need to work with our kids around having their own voice, but often their voice gets muted during this time around their friends. The last part is the most exciting characteristic. And if you get to hang out with adolescents, you already know what I'm talking about. Creative exploration. So my life right now, I live in a home with 3 adolescents. I have a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 17-year-old. And sometimes the things they talk about just blow my mind. They have incredible insight, creative ideas about how to solve problems. Really, really, really cool stuff happening during this stage. They'll knock your socks off. Just pay attention. Like, it's really exceptionally cool during this time to see the things they come up with. Oop. Now, when we think about transition, it is really, really important to think about all transition tends to increase our levels of discomfort for you and for them, right? What's important about this stage for parents is that often we can remember our own high school journey. Some people can remember middle school, but almost all adults can remember high school. And what happens is we see high school through our own personal lens, right? And it can bring up lots of feelings around this. And new can be really challenging, right? So this is an important part for you to know your child. When you see your child struggling, there will be some struggle in this transition. There will. There's new stuff that needs to be learned. And so new stuff requires some stretching, and stretching often is uncomfortable. So you should anticipate that there will be some discomfort. But how you respond to the discomfort is very important. So knowing your child is really important here. One of the hardest things as a parent is to watch your kid struggle. It is painful. It is not easy. And our gut instinct will be to dive in and rescue. But this is a really important thing to consider. If every time your child struggles, you dive in and rescue, how are they ever going to learn the emotional muscles necessary for life? Life is full of big feelings. Life is full of out of the blue turns, requirements, pivots, swiveling, changing. If you always dive in at the first sign of struggle, your kiddo will not gain the muscles necessary to manage. Not only that, it undermines their own story about personal agency. So one of the things that the book, How to Raise an Adult, talks about is she talks about this story of this kiddo coming to her office and saying to her, "We have a problem." And she looked at the student and said, "We don't have a problem. You might have a problem, but I don't have a problem." And this student went on to say, "Well, my mom's going to be emailing you about one of my professors." And she looked at the student and said, "You're a freshman at Stanford. I'm not addressing an email from your parent. You need to figure this out." This is one of those stages that we really need to build them up so that they can effectively move into the next stage. So knowing when to dive in and when to resist. So I'll tell you what I do. I always kind of use this metaphor of my kids are swimming in the middle of a pool. That's life, right? And they start struggling. And I see them out there and they're struggling. They're going under. They look like they're drowning. I'm like, oh dear. Like my gut instinct is to run and just dive in, right? Save them, hook them, swim to the side. I try to run to the side and say to myself, Jen, is this an opportunity for them to learn how to tread water right here? Do I really need to dive in? Sometimes you need to dive in. This is a time where you don't just cut them loose and say, good luck, see you in 4 years, build some muscles. No. They need you. They will need you sometimes. But it is a really good idea to pause before diving in. If they, so I'll give you a perfect example. First round of finals. So I have a freshman at home, and first round of finals, we talked to him about, how do you feel like you're doing with studying? Like, he's like, I'm fine. He's really about independence and autonomy, right? So I'm fine. I got this. Like, leave me alone. Well, he had to learn the hard way. You got to really dive in and study in high school. It's a different game, right? You can't just, think you're going to coast through. That's not the way it works. But what he learned from that experience is he learned he has to study. If I had to dove in and tried to micromanage him and demanded, he would have resisted anyway. And the same, the result likely would have been the same, just he would have been angry at us, right? The lesson he learned was that the choice he made created a different, an outcome, and he had to, he had the consequences of the outcome. So just pause before diving in. The next thing to consider is broadening your definition of school success to include life skills. What I mean by this is I get to hang out with loads of really incredibly capable kids. When we start popping the hood on whether or not they have much perseverance or resilience, or what are their stress management, skills? How do they talk to themselves when the going gets tough? How do they manage the conflict that comes with this developmental stage? What are their skills, their emotional skills? How is their EQ? How is their ability to see outside of themselves and the inside of other people? How do they do with compassion and empathy, right? Like, all of these skills, how do they set goals, and how do they make decisions, right? All of these things are critical to this particular stage and the stage after this, right? Which is adulthood, life. So beyond just how are they doing in their AP class, what grade do they have? This is your opportunity to really set the stage on what is learning. What do you want for them? Do you only want the product of the grade, or do you want them to also focus on the process of learning? This staying at home has really created an interesting, opportunity for kids to decide, am I learning just for the grade, or am I learning because I want to learn, right? You get to endorse one of these narratives. And what you think about this really matters. So if you're just hitting the grade and you're not thinking about all those emotional skills, you can be a really successful academic and really have a very, very difficult time in the next stage if you don't hone in on those very essential life skills. Okay, number one thing I hear from teens all the time is that the adults in their life don't listen. So here's the thing about listening. Often people think that they're not being heard because the person doesn't agree with them. So that's not the definition of listening. Listening is really creating space for someone to have a reciprocal conversation. And often as adults during this stage, we just want to lecture or feed them all of our Yoda wisdom. But truly listening is a gift. In our life, we make sense of our emotions through storytelling much of the time. And leaning in and listening to your kid tell you the story of their life allows so many things to happen. what tends to happen in that listening is they will begin to open the window for you then to come in and bestow your wisdom. But if we just come at them all the time, they stop listening to us. During this developmental stage, they listen less to us and watch more. So if you're somebody who says, yeah, grades don't matter, but they overhear you talking on the phone to your best friend about, oh, can you believe so-and-so is failing? How you act, they pay attention to more than what you're saying to them, right? And they're still really paying attention. One of the gifts we give them during this time is creating space to listen to what is happening in their life. Even if it's about stuff that you're like, oh my Lanta, why are we even talking about this? Remember, their experience is real to them. Something that seems like something very trivial to you might be very, very big to them. So to be able to create that environment where they lean into you can be exceptionally beneficial during this time. There's also this really great question that I want to say Lisa Demure, who wrote Untangled. I think I got this question from her, but I don't know. I got it from somebody who's way smarter than me. The question is this: when things aren't going great and they really need your support, often I will say to kids, is there anything I can do right now that won't make it worse? Right? They often won't have the words to tell us how to make it better, but they will tell us how we could make it worse, right? So to really listen into those questions, those answers to those questions. So I want you to absolutely understand that you still have influence. So even though peers really are kind of in the passenger seat with them, you have massive amounts of influence. Okay, so this was taken from our last youth survey that we did in the state of Washington, and these were 8th grade answers. So these weren't your 8th graders. It would have been 2018. So these were the answers from the 2018 8th graders. But I want you to see how awesome. This is to Camas. This is a Camas statistic. So 85% of 8th graders at that time felt they could discuss problems with their parents. That is awesome. 85% of them felt like they could still have fun with their parents. What? That is awesome, right? But I do want you to also look over here at the parental protective influences. 62% of them said parents talked to them about not drinking. Something tells me more than 62% of parents in Camas would want their kids to know that they don't think drinking as an 8th grader is a very good idea. But sometimes we don't have those tough conversations because they create discomfort. And sometimes we just assume that they know what we think. It is an important decision to decide how to share your values with your kids, your own opinions about these things. And I don't mean like blast them with a lecture. I think it's important to sit down and have conversations about these things, because if you're not informing them, just know their peers are informing them. This gives us an opportunity to really use our influence. High school is a chance to really think about your role. So there's going to be a lot of organizational skills necessary to manage high school. It's a huge step. Boom. It's like not a little step, it's a big step, because they have so many different classes that are demanding so many different things. And if you heard all of the things that are changing during the adolescence restructuring, one of them really hones in on that organizational skills. Many of them don't have the organizational skills necessary to manage a lot of this. So we have to figure out how to coach it, right? How do we coach these skills? Well, we show them how to do it. We sit with them while they do it, and then we let them do it, right? We don't just assume these skills just naturally happen. So I'm going to give you a personal example. One of the things I do in my own daily life, a ritual of my own, is I make a list with a little box next to everything I need to do. Why? Because I love lists. I like to check things off. I like to feel myself moving, right? So my kids, two of my kids have really adopted that visual schedule, that need for movement. One of my kids, so when this whole distance learning started, we came down, we wrote out lists of what are we doing, what's necessary. One of my kids took that list, took it upstairs, chucked it up over, like, I don't need this. I know what I'm doing, basically, right? Like, I have to ebb and flow to their needs. That kiddo needs me instead of helping them make an organizational list. He needs me to really say to him, so what's your plan today? What are you going to do? And he shows me, and I give him some leeway. And if things fall apart, I say, hey, I got this, email saying you're missing this assignment. Can you show it to me? Like, I'm not trying to micromanage. I'm just trying to coach. And I also really think it's an awesome opportunity to celebrate their successes when we coach, right? This idea that learning is full of mistakes and mishaps. When we manage, we tend to be critical. No, don't do it that way. Do it this way. But think about yourself, how those different approaches, how you're able to receive them differently. When we're managed, we feel it. We don't like it. Our emotions get involved, and often we get really defensive. When someone's alongside of us and trying to coach us, it feels better. We're able to receive it in a different way. This is an opportunity for you to really think about your role in this next chapter, because that's what this transition to high school is. It's a brand new chapter, which is so exciting. So although peers really drive the bus, they desperately need to be anchored to the safe harbor of you. So, often adolescents mask up. They tuck things in just to belong. It can be really fatiguing to feel like you have to quiet some parts of yourself, and that you can't fully be seen. And home needs to be a place where they can do that. Home needs to be a place where it can be messy. They can let loose, and that's hard because we tend to get the short end of the stick. We get the messy parts, the falling apart parts, the sobbing parts, the angry parts, right? But that's because we're the safe place, right? It's hard, but it's really essential. And this next stage will have to demand you to think about, how do I continue to connect in new ways, right? So you have to be creative. Whereas before, they might really actively seek you out and want to hang out with you. That might not be the case anymore. They might go to their room and shut the door and not want to hang out with you anymore. But it's really important for you to try, and it's really important for you to fold them into family time if you can. One of my kids, we have a date once a month where it is a demand of mine, and he really resists and doesn't love it. But I say, hey, I miss you. I need to hang out with you. And this is a good way for us to do it. And I go, I'm a vegetarian, and I end up spending a lot of time at restaurants that don't have a lot of options. But that's because I allow him to choose. I let him kind of figure out the pace of what we're going to do. But that time together is really, really important. I don't bombard him with questions. We just hang out, and it's really lovely, but it takes intention, and it takes making it a priority. And sometimes when they're prickly, you're like, yeah, I don't want to hang out with you. But it's really important to find ways to connect to them during this time, even when it's hard. So because of all of the shifting that happens during high school, sometimes some things come up that you might get a bit worried about, right? Maybe you can tell that their mood is really shifted and changed, or, it really does take a village often. Kids hear different things from different people. So if you are worried about your child, if something is going on and you're like, I don't know, they're just not allowing me in, it's absolutely okay for you to reach out for support. So you can reach out to their school counselor. You can reach out to their teachers. You can get support yourself, right? It's important for you to hang out with adults that help you along this way. So there's different stages of life that we really need support. This is one of them. So this part can be can be a bit messy. So we need to enlist the help of people to help support our kids during this bumpy part. You can anticipate some bumps. That's part of the deal. So if things get really bumpy, don't hesitate to reach out for support. So the thing about adolescents is this. What happens is they start being able to talk like adults. So we start shifting our expectations that they are adults. They are not adults. Even if they start growing a beard, they are not an adult. Think of it this way. On any given day during adolescence, plus or minus 5 biological years. And that's the norm. So that means you might be talking to an 18-year-old, but really in that moment, emotionally, they're a 13-year-old. So it allows you to have an appropriate expectation about what is happening because they're still cooking. Their brain is still changing. It's still really integrating and coming together. So it is important to keep that in mind. So to have an expectation that they have it all together, no, they're going to disappoint you because take it back to yourself as a high schooler. You didn't have it all together. None of us did because we were still developing. We were still growing the skills necessary for us to become our best selves. So it's highly important for you to check your expectation. Just give it a second. Like when something is happening, give yourself a moment to be like, okay, what's really going on here, right? Versus just going full demand on them. They're still growing and changing. It's just like if you go to Target and you see a toddler melting down at 9 o'clock at night, you're like, man, they're tired. They're tired, they're hungry. The same thing is true about adolescents. That's why they call it the second toddlerhood. They need us. You know, and I'm not saying that we don't provide expectations. They desperately need clear, consistent boundaries, desperately. Because when we're clear, it allows their nervous system to settle. It allows their big emotions to settle because they know where the line is. It's when we don't provide a line, when things are all blurry, that they don't know what's going on. And that's when things get a bit messier. But it's important to check your expectation. So I did make a little tip sharing sheet for you. I'm going to share it with you if I can. Oop, nope, it's not there. Hold on one sec. Let's see if it's back here. No, it's not. So I just want you to be aware that on the CSD website, on the wellness page, I'm going to plop this video and I'm also going to plop this little tip sheet to help remind you of some of the things that we've talked about tonight. But now I really just want to kind of open it up for folks if they have questions or if they have connections or if they have advice for folks walking into this next stage. So my part of this workshop is done. I'd love to hear what you folks have to say. So you should just know about me. I'm really comfortable with awkward long silences, so I can wait for quite a while. But I really am interested in hearing what you folks have to say, because that's what we do. We learn from each other. So does anybody have a question or?
I do. Okay. So thank you so much. That was very powerful and enlightening, and I feel so much better. My question is revolving COVID-19 and how can we factor in a new transition to a new school and COVID-19, those clashing together?
Yes. So, I mean, I think that it is an extremely unique time, right? It is a unique time that demands us to use our flexibility muscles because there's loads of things that are out of our control, loads, right? So this is an opportunity for us to figure out how we manage the big emotions of this, right? And what I would encourage you to do is to proceed as if high school is coming in the traditional way, okay? So what that would look like is getting familiar with the setting. So like driving by, looking at the website, participating in all of the transition activities, right? Because what that does is it quiets those worries that tend to happen with transitions. The other thing is to really talk about that this is going to demand us to be flexible, right? It is out of our control. And when we talk about it, we tend to have a different stance with the big emotions. So think about it like this. When we can anticipate that there might be a need for, that big emotions might be coming, think about yourself at the beach, standing in the waves. And if you know that the big waves are coming, you plant your body in a different way, right? And then when the big wave comes, you're actually able to withstand it. But if we go into it all like, and we're not talking about it, boom, we get blasted with it. So spend some time talking about it. Say, what do you think about this starting high school and maybe the possibility that some of it might be remote? What do you think about that? And they might be like, great, like, I don't want to go, which would be a normal response, right? Because it's going to be a bit scary, right? Just provide an opportunity for a discussion, but we can't control any of it, right? It's just this talking through it, creating an environment a family environment that says we can talk about hard stuff, right? We can talk about feelings. That's what we do here. So whatever comes up, we'll manage it together. I hope that answered. Anybody else? Ooh, somebody asked a question in the chat. Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm going to put my email in the chat if anybody wants to email me directly. Does anybody else have any good questions or any connections or any advice? Yay, yes. Take yourself off of mute so we can hear you. Oh, can't hear you. Yeah, now we can hear you. Okay.
My question is, so like you said, I have 3 kids. One is a 17-year-old and the other one is going to be a freshman this fall.
Mm-hmm.
He's a total different species because he is super quiet. My daughter used to be talkative, and every time I ask her, she just blurt everything. He's very quiet. So how do I manage that? How do I make a connection with him if he doesn't talk to me? Every time I ask, hey, how you doing? How's this coronavirus affecting you? I'm fine, Mom. Kind of thing.
So I think that often verbal processors expect everyone to be a verbal processor. But it's important to understand that connection can happen without a verbal reciprocal conversation. Connection can just be sitting next to each other. You know, one of the things that I do with my nonverbal kid is we drive in the car. He gets to manage the radio, and we don't do much talking, but we're together. It creates this sense of an opportunity to talk, right? So to respect that not everybody loves people asking them questions. Like, I freak people out because I ask all kinds of questions, right? Like, but when I get the sense that that's not the way they roll, I back off. So remember that cat analogy. He might be more like a cat. He might be more cautious. He might need you to just sit by him and let him approach you versus you running at him, right? Connection is more than just talking. You know, I had this beautiful conversation with somebody that told me the way that she connects with her teenage son is she gives him foot massages. No talking, just rubs his feet. There's different ways to connect, right? Sometimes it's just playing basketball or playing King's Corner, right? Like, remember this, and I'm just going to say this generally. It's a generalized statement. Boys tend to do best with parallel communication. What that means is they don't want you just staring at them saying, how are you doing? They don't like that. Their nervous system goes berserk, right? So parallel conversation can happen in the car when you're not looking at each other, or shooting baskets, or playing video games next to each other, right? Those are wonderful times to engage in conversation because the nervous system is settled, because we're not bombarding them, right? We're not like staring in their eyes and saying, how are you doing? And they're like, oh my limb, get away from me. My nervous system doesn't like that. You just have to find a way to connect, and it might be worth asking him, you know, I'd like to hang out with you. How can we do that? Like, I miss being with you. How can we do that in a way that doesn't like kill you? Like, doesn't send you through the roof? Like, can I buy you a Burgerville shake? Like, you know, like, ask him. He'll probably let you know. That would be
Okay.
my
Thank you.
okay. You bet. Anybody else?
I have one question.
Sure.
So my son, he's going to transition from middle school to high school, and he's going to change schools,
Okay.
which means that some of his existing friends, or actually I would say 90% of his existing friends from middle school, are not coming to the new high school that he's going to go to.
Yes.
So, and he's my only son, so he's kind of a little bit of an introvert, at least with us.
Yes.
How do we make that transition easy for him where he can make new friends and he can feel like he has been welcomed into the new community?
Yes. So you should know that our district for the last couple years has really honed in on transitions. We've done all this work on how do we support the transitions, the transition to kindergarten, the transition to sixth grade, the transition to high school. So whatever high school he's going to, we'll spend a lot of time cultivating connections during that transition. That, I mean, we've put in place all kinds of programming to help that. But one of the things that you could do is remind him of the connections that he's made along the way, right? So he has the ability to do that. He's done that. And this next adventure will afford him a lot of new people to meet. His best friend might be out there waiting for him. He just doesn't know it yet, right? So creating a positive narrative about this next step, because what you believe about this transition really matters. If you're super worried about it, they're going to worry too. They feel what we have inside of us about this story. That's why it's really important to believe in their ability to manage this. Even if part of you is like, ooh, this is going to be a bit ugly. Like, there's going to be a lot of growing that's happening. You have to believe in the power of them being able to do it. Because if you don't, they will sense it and it will activate this doubt in them. So it's important for us to create this narrative that this is an opportunity, right? I hope that helped. I'm rooting for him. He's gonna
Yeah,
find.
no, thank you. Yeah, that definitely helps. Would you recommend that he seeks out new friends or maybe reach out to a counselor at the school or something to ease that transition? Or what's the steps he should take to make it easier for himself as well?
Is he going to a bigger high school, or do you mind me asking?
Yeah, so he's transitioning basically from Odyssey to CHS.
Okay, so likely did he go to elementary school in Camas?
No, so in his case, he has changed schools. This is his third time he's changing schools. So he
Okay,
did a lot of his elementary education in Oregon.
okay,
Then when we came to Washington, he went to Elahi for 1 year. Then
okay,
he went to Skyridge for another year, and then
okay.
he did 2 years at Odyssey, and now he's going to Camas High. So that's like his fourth school now.
So he probably still knows people from Skyridge, right? And so if he has any connection still with somebody who's going to go to CHS, this summer might be a good opportunity for him to reconnect with them. But
Okay.
that being said, even rolling into Camas High School, you might have 20 friends. There's a good chance you're not going to have any of those friends in your classes. That's just the flat out experience of it. It's that big. So you might go in thinking, oh, I'm going to have my friends in my classes. It is not the same. So he's going in basically the same as everybody else, that you meet new people. It's an opportunity to meet new people. And there's a really great program at Camas High School called Link Crew that matches juniors up with freshmen, and they get into small groups and they do a lot of community building. So he'll meet people. Absolutely. So I wouldn't spend too much time and energy on it unless he has friends from Skyridge that he should reconnect with.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet. Anybody else? Nope. Okay. So my one last plug would be this. There are some really great books out there. So one of the books I already referenced is How to Raise an Adult. And when I reference it, often people are like, man, it's too late. Like I should have read that right when they're going to high school. It's really worth reading. It's funny. She also has a really great TED Talk. So if you would prefer to watch versus read, she just has a lot of really solid points about how we're helping to build the necessary characteristics in our kiddos to allow them to effectively launch. She speaks to the failed launching often, right? And so she presses us to do more and to back out more and to quit rescuing, right? So that's a great book. Brainstorm is an awesome book. Untangled, if you have a daughter, is a fabulous book about adolescents and girls. And The Age of Opportunity is a really great book as well that talks about adolescence. So this is an exciting time. New chapter, right? So to think of it in a positive spin versus that old idea that, oh, teenagers are so hard and prickly and, you know, we could buy into that whole deal, but it doesn't help us out. You know, this is going to be muscle growing. Why not tend to lean to the side of this is going to be pretty exciting? Watching your kid change and grow is going to be really awesome, right? So buckle in for the ride. It's going to be awesome. So so somebody is asking me for the books on, oh, nice. Look at that, James. Thank you so much. Put them on that chat for you. But they'll also be on the tip sheet that will be on the Camas School District Wellness page. There's all kinds of articles and videos, and I'm in charge of bringing people in to do workshops. And so we videotape those, and those are on there. And there's lots of resources around COVID and being at home and all kinds of stuff. So I'd encourage you to check out that website. That's where all of that stuff will be. So I appreciate you coming and hanging out with me on this sunny, unexpected sunny night. So if anybody else has any last minute questions, this would be the time. Other than that, you can also find this video recording on that website as well. So Camas School District Wellness page, if somebody missed it and you were like, oh, they really wanted to go and see it, you can tell them they can watch it on there. Okay? All right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Take care. Enjoy the next phase.
Thank you.
Yep,
Thank you so much.
You betcha.